So, the 1850s was, simply put, not a fun time to be the United States of America. The government was slowly falling apart as 3 presidents in a row attempted to kick the can known as nobody can agree on the issue of slavery down the road, as everyone else had been doing for the last 75 years, not realizing they're kicking it against a wall. And the individual states tended to feel the brunt of this instability. Though one state which nobody tends to talk about during this time period, or ever unless you're me, is Iowa. This decade was a time of growth for the Hawkeye State as groups of settlers hailing from all corners of the country began to settle the young state. The most prominent of these groups originated from New England and the other corners of the Midwest. Most of these settlers tended to hold strong anti-slavery views, which allowed the abolitionist movement to take hold in the state as it had in much of the northern U.S. The Underground Railroad would be present in the state, Governor James Grimes would covertly fund anti-slavery forces during Bleeding Kansas by using the classic trick of, "Oops, I forgot the key to the arsenal on my desk!" And even John Brown, the domestic terrorist everyone can get behind because he kinda had a point, used the state as a base in which to plan his raid on Harper's Ferry, even recruiting men from the state, which would later lead to a nationwide scandal in 1860 as the newly elected Governor Samuel Kirkwood refused to extradite one Barclay Coppock to Virginia, instead allowing him to escape to Canada. Now, despite the overwhelming presence of abolitionism among much of the citizenry, in many cities and even among the political elite, Southern sympathies tended to run pretty deep. Dubuque would be known as a stronghold of Southern sympathizers, and Senator George Wallace Jones was often labeled as a, quote, Democrat in politics and a Southerner by instincts. Obviously, due to the influence both these groups held within the state, it created a lot of tension. But hey, it's not like the South would decide to secede and start a civil war which would make the tension even worse, right? We done did it, Cletus. We whipped them Yankee boys. Mama gonna be so proud of us, she might even make a chili night. So after the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, the tension that existed between abolitionist and pro-Southern factions exploded throughout the Union, and Iowa was not spared from this. Despite Iowa being firmly on the side of the Union with influential figures of the time such as Governor Kirkwood, Representative and later General Samuel Curtis, and Senator James Harlan throwing their full support behind President Lincoln, alongside more men enlisting for the Army than the state government could handle, much less supply. Due to this overwhelming support for the Union, those who held Southern sympathies would retaliate by protesting the war and even in some extreme instances defect to the Confederacy. These Copperheads, as they became known as, would find numerous ways to try and undermine support for the war. One story exists of several young men and a woman who attended a pro-war rally at Cornell College while wearing badges identifying themselves as Copperheads, and quickly seeing this, a group of women attending the rally would begin to attack the young woman. Well, that's a bit extreme.
Do you want to be next, Raymond?
3 cheers for the Union, lads! Another of these instances would occur on August 1st of 1863, where on the banks of the English River, a Baptist minister by the name of Seifert Talley, who is known as one of the preeminent voices of the Copperhead movement within southeastern Iowa, would hold one of his speeches, which he was locally famous for. Or infamous for, depends on who you ask. Anyway, the speech included the normal Copperhead talking points, support for secession, condemning the Lincoln administration, and labeling the war as an abolitionist's crusade. But this speech was a tad different because after it wrapped up, Talley rounded up some of the attendees and headed into the nearby town of South English to see what response he would get from the locals. Did I mention that they all had guns? Yeah, I should probably mention that part. So strolling in the town with an armed posse who were taunting the townsfolk, Talley was in total shock to find that the town of South English wasn't too much of a fan of him or his followers. So, in response, the townfolk created an armed posse of their own and began to swarm Talley's posse. Subsequently, both groups began yelling at each other, and oh hey look, both sides are getting their guns, and oh great, a fight just broke out, and someone just shot and killed Seifert Talley. Well then. With this instigating action, Talley's posse would retreat from South English and begin to fortify themselves on the banks of the Skunk River, taking the name of the Skunk River Army. Word of Talley's murder would quickly reach the larger Copperhead community, and within a few days a large number of men would join the Skunk River Army. Some sources say as little as 500 men showed up, and some say as much as 4,000 showed up, but what we do know for certain was that the Copperheads were ready to get some good old-fashioned revenge on the town of South English. In response, the town would fortify itself with the intention to repel an attack from the Copperheads. They would also send out an excursion to Davenport in order to make a plea to the state government for assistance. This standoff would persist for the next couple days until word began to reach the Skunk River Army that hundreds of state militia troops armed with numerous cannons and reportedly led by Governor Kirkwood himself were heading their way. So in response, the Skunk River Army would unanimously declare, "Yep, no, screw this," and begin to head home. Shortly afterwards, the state militia showed up in South English only to discover that the Skunk River Army had completely disbanded. So not wanting to make their trip to town completely pointless, they would arrest 12 people in connection to the murder of Cypher Tally. Though, despite these 12 arrests, nobody would ever be convicted, despite local legends saying that the community was aware of who shot Tally. So, if there's a moral to the story, it's... Look, if you're searching for a moral in a dumb little history video on the internet, you just really need some help.